All right, welcome everybody. We are thankful that you're joining us for another presentation today. We were actually talking on our team call this morning about just seeing so many familiar faces, event after event. So I won't bore you with my intro and housekeeping. I will just give you a quick overview of the presentation today. So this is a really great one, and one we've been kind of teasing and leading up to throughout the Snacks with Stacie series. So as you start your career, it can be really challenging to avoid playing that role of newbie. So Stacie VanSkiver, who is an HR manager for Corning Environmental Technologies, Global Engineering, has prepared some really great content with open dialogue on how to earn credibility early in your career. Again, this is part of a weekly series that I highly recommend you all attend, with some really great topics that are targeted towards those beginning or early in their career. So with that, I will turn it over to Stacie.
Okay, great. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us again, and thanks for sticking with us through the series. I think this is really helpful content, and I hope that you're all getting a lot out of it. I've been able to join in and attend a couple of other sessions, and I've learned some from my peers as well. So that's an important lesson we'll talk about today, is that continuous learning. Can everybody see my screen before I continue? You okay, Jessica, Karen?
Yep, you're good.
Okay, great.
You're good.
I have 3 monitors going, so I wanted to make sure we were good. So as Jessica said, we've been talking a lot and sort of had some teasers in some of our previous sessions on the importance of earning credibility early in your career. And I do have some slides today, but I'm really hoping that you can read the slides that'll be on the screen, but also hoping we can get this conversation to be good engagement and good dialogue, and that you can not only get input from me, but take an advantage of an opportunity to learn from some of your peers who are on the phone or online as well. And before we go to the next slide, what I'd like to ask you all is to kind of put yourself in the shoes where you are starting your new job. Today's day 1, and you are walking into a meeting, and there are in that room an average of 30 years of career experience and 6 people in the room. And as we go through this whole deck, kind of put yourself in that scenario the whole time, and really think about if you were that person, and you probably don't believe this now, but you will blink your eyes and you will be that person someday. How would you want a new hire to approach their career? And that's really the mindset we're going to be in as we go through this deck, is really thinking about what you can do to help yourself to be effective and successful as you onboard into a new organization. There we go. I thought we were going to stall on me for a minute. So to help put this presentation together, as Jessica said, I've been a long time HR manager, both with Corning and with other Fortune 500 organizations. And I also went out to a lot of engineering leaders in the organization. I know many of you have engineering undergrads and are going to be looking at going into technical careers. So it's not only my insight that I've learned through a lot of years of career experience, but it's also talking to a lot of engineering leaders and asking them what advice they would personally give you. And I know that you got to talk to some of our engineering council leaders this week. So I think you'll probably start to, as we go through some of this content, hear some recurring themes. And that's good. I think the more times you hear the messages, the more that tells you how important it is in an organization, and the more it will help you with your development plans as you continue your career. So I talked to several engineering leaders. You can see on the screen the questions that I asked them, and then I've incorporated their input into this presentation. Before we get started, I would like to take a minute in the chat to have each of you answer this question. What is it that would be on your mind, your first day employee, and you have new hire jitters? What kinds of questions and concerns might be on your mind? Make it a good first impression? Good. What's a typical day look like? How do I get the ball rolling on the first day? Good. Okay. I'm sure we'll get some responses that continue to come in. How to get noticed, good, and behavior norms. Okay. Not wanting to mess something up early, that's a good one. Okay, all right, good answers. So we're going to talk to you today about how you can help some of those things. And I see Amanda just said, how do I get people to listen to my professional opinions? And that is a very common answer to this question. People are generally concerned about how to get a seat at the table and be heard and have a voice, and not being invested, but also giving my employer the sense that I'm invested. Great. Okay, good answers. Perfect. So I think we're going to address a lot of those things through this dialogue and discussion that we're going to have. So the first thing that I really heard overwhelmingly from every engineering leader that I talked to and can tell you has been my experience throughout my career is that as a new hire, I would recommend that you start, if you've ever read any Stephen Covey, and if you haven't, I highly recommend it. Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And one of the things that he talks about is begin with the end in mind. And that's really important as you go through your career. It's important to have a destination in mind. But I can also tell you that as you go through your career, you should probably keep your options open to different destinations. And so think of it as a journey where you set out and you may intend to be on a road trip to California, but you're going to take different paths and different stops along the way. And what I would encourage you to do as you think about your career is think about it as a journey. You will always have a goal in mind. You're going to have your North Star. You're going to have your destination. You're going to have your desired career in mind. But be open to other opportunities as well. Some of my best career experiences didn't come because I had my eye on that role or that job or that assignment, but because someone saw something in me that I hadn't seen in myself and saw an opportunity and came to tap me on the shoulder for it. And those opportunities tended to be the ones that took me the most out of my comfort zone. They tended to be the ones that stretched me the most and also, therefore, helped me to grow the most. And so the best advice we have for you here on this topic is that when you're given a path in your career, an opportunity to either further yourself on the destination or journey that you've been on, and or a potential to maybe take a different path or a different route, be open to those opportunities. Hear them out. Understand what people think you'll gain from that, what experiences they think that will help you to achieve, and how they think that will help you to fit into the longer-term goal. Don't close things off right at the beginning. Really be open to try to better understand what the goal is. So I think this is an excellent piece of advice, and it came up from nearly every engineering leader I asked. It was almost universal advice, and I would tell you that if I hadn't asked the engineers and just started out with what my HR experience has been, this is absolutely a piece of advice that I would have incorporated. So it's really important to recognize, especially as a new hire, that you have a ton to learn. You also have a ton to offer, and we're going to tackle that in the final topic that I'll do here in a few weeks, which is reverse coaching. So we'll talk in a couple more weeks about what you can bring to the table and what you offer as a new hire. But today we're going to focus on your experience as the new hire around a lot more seasoned and experienced talent, and really just recognizing that you have a lot to learn and learn to enjoy the experience. And we're going to talk a little bit more today about how you can do that. Oh, and I see, I'm looking at the chat, you just recommended The Speed of Trust. That is absolutely also a fantastic book. So I would highly recommend that if you haven't read that. And I think, E, correct me if I'm wrong, I feel like there might be a TED Talk around that book as well, or at least a specific chapter from that book from the author. So if you are aware of that, we can probably put that in the link as well. There we go. So this one, I'm not going to go through every box on the slide. I'm actually, before I start talking through and sharing some stories with some of these boxes, feel free to comment if you see other characteristics that you think I didn't include that might be value added for others. But one of the best pieces of career advice that I would give you as a new hire joining an organization especially if you're joining a large organization like Corning, is to keep in mind that every person you meet could be your boss someday. And to treat them as such, and really have a good collaboration, a good relationship, and a good approach with everyone that you meet. I cannot underestimate the value of being able to build relationships in an organization, and that includes when you're in a technical field. The people who have deep technical skills and experience, and when I say technical, it's whatever field you're joining, whether that's HR, IT, or engineering. If you are deeply technical, capable, and credible in your field and have good relationship ability, you will have a lot of opportunity in your career. And so this is going to give you some tips on how to build some of those relationship skills as you go through your career. We're going to talk I think next week on why charisma and personality really matter. And so we'll get into some of this in a little bit more detail and go a little deeper. But for today, we'll just touch on some of these briefly. The first one I want to focus on is don't underestimate the importance of smiling. And to just kind of clarify this point, I would ask you all to think about how many times do you like to work around people who never smile? And what is the value of a smile to a conversation? People generally like to work with happy people. So it's something to really think about. Now, does that mean you have to run around smiling all the time, even when the conditions don't warrant it? No, of course not. But if your general demeanor and approach to life is to be a happy, satisfied, and content person, that tends to be the type of people that others are drawn to and want to work around. The other one I'll cover is the importance of humility. It's really important to be willing to admit when you're wrong. And now, as you grow in your professional career, you'll learn there's ways to go about doing that. You also don't want to run around all the time apologizing and saying, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. That's also probably not a good recommended approach. But there is a way to be willing to own up to your mistakes, own up to your decisions. And one way you can do that is to really capture lessons learned and be able to humbly say, boy, if I had that one to do all over again, this is probably what I would do differently. And so we'll talk about that more on the self-reflection page, but it is really important to be humble. And with that goes being kind and respectful, and that's respectful of everyone. Where you tend to see, we talked about a little about this in our first discussion, where we talked about, I guess that was 2 weeks ago, having a technical debate. And you heard me share a lot of examples and a lot of stories if you were able to attend that session. And if you didn't, you can go back and listen to the recording, where you have to be able to have a respectful conversation and a respectful debate. Being kind and respectful does not mean being agreeable all the time, right? Some of the best engineering solutions, some of the best technical problem solving is going to come from having good debate, but it's doing it in a way that's respectful. Really get to know people, care about them as a person, be helpful, collaborate. Know your organization's values. Know what is important in the organization that you're joining. And one of you, when I asked sort of what would be on your mind that first day, alluded to this, right? It's being able to understand what's the norm, what's the expectation, how do we do things here? And just the fact that one of you thought to even say that and ask that question tells you're thinking along the right path already. It's really about being inquisitive. Ask questions for clarity. Seek understanding, want to know how things get done. And that's just a great way to ask the question, what's the normal operating practice here? How would others typically approach this? And that can really help you understand. I think when you find you ask those questions a lot, you're going to hear a consistent theme about what's really important to an organization. So for example, if this were day one for you at Corning, you would probably hear multiple people using some terms very similar to what I've used now: relationships, respect, dignity, values. You're going to hear those terms a lot in just a few introductory meetings with different employees. And so all you have to do is set up some informational meetings your first week and really ask people, what's important in the organization? How does this organization measure success? How will I know when I'm doing a good job? Those sorts of answers will tell you what the organization values. And what you'll find as you go through your career is that each company has a common set of values that really consistently apply across the company. Whether you are sitting in China or Taiwan or Germany or the United States, you're going to find that thread of values. But then you'll also find what I call the culture within the culture, which is different plants are going to have a different culture, different functions are going to have a different culture. And so the more that you ask those questions cross-functionally and across different businesses, the more you'll really learn about what underlies the success and the path to success within a company. And what I would highly encourage you as you think about joining your career and thinking about everybody as your future boss is know what the values of the organization are fairly quickly and live to those values. And if they are values that you feel you can't live to, you may be in the wrong organization. And it's important to ask yourself that question early because the people who grow and will be the most successful are going to be the people who can align to the inherent values of the company. That's not to say we're all the same people. You know, one of Coreen's values, for example, is that we respect and value the differences that people bring to the table. We value that, right? So that doesn't mean you have to be the same or do things just like others, but it does mean your fundamental underlying values and the things you care about and think about are very similar. Make an impact. You know, one of the things that you want to remember, and remember in this slide, we're focused on every person that you have an interaction with as a job interview. Every person you're talking to could be your boss someday. Really think about that when you think about what you're delivering. It's about delivering impact. And the way that I personally do that is really think about what's the legacy I'm going to leave in every role that I'm in. And I know that I'm not going to accomplish everything I would love to accomplish because there's just not enough time in the day or days in the year. But what is really important to me, and how does that tie to what's really important to the business? And those are the things that I want to be my legacy. So really thinking about and identifying those things up front. Asking a lot of questions, taking ownership, taking accountability. If you say you're going to do it, do it. Don't commit to things and then not deliver them. And if you run into problems, and you will, if you run into hurdles, and you will, it's taking ownership for saying, I know I committed to do this. I know I'm expected to deliver that next week, but here's the hurdles I'm running into. Here's some tools that would be beneficial. Here's some help I could use in overcoming those challenges. And here's some ideas that I have, because you always want to bring a solution to the table as opposed to just the problem. Being a good listener is so important, and I think one of you mentioned that earlier in our chat when we asked that question. And really learning how to see the world through other people's eyes. The more that you understand and listen to other people's positions, the more you will appreciate and respect them. But the more that you'll also be able to have the time and the bandwidth to share your own views and visions. And then be really good at reading environment and social cues. I think somebody else mentioned that above as well. That's a really important first stage editor. And we just talked about how you do that. You ask a lot of questions, you seek clarity, you get to know a lot of different people, you build friendships, you build relationships, and those individuals will all help you with reading the social cues and the environment. So before I proceed to the next stage, first of all, thank you, Eve, for posting that link to the Speed of Trust TED Talk. I highly encourage that everyone take that link and watch it. Very short, but very powerful and impactful. And then thank you, Jessica. Yeah, I can't reinforce that enough. Bosses really like people who bring solutions and not just problems. Now, that doesn't mean you're going to have the answer to everything that happens in the world. In fact, you probably won't, but at least be able to brainstorm some possible solutions and come with some ideas as opposed to just problems, and it will significantly add to your value and impact to an organization. So before we go on to the next slide, this will be a good opportunity for anyone, if there's any element that anyone thinks I missed about how to make a good impression early on and treat others like a boss. Are there other characteristics that you think we should call out here? And you can post it in the chat or go off mute, either's fine. Okay. All right, well, feel free to go ahead and add them as you think through them, and I would encourage everyone to watch the chat. I'm sure that others online will continue to share other good ideas as well. Okay, So the next thing I want to talk about is we talked about good first impressions, right? How do you start to build the relationships early? How do you start to treat everyone like they're your potential future boss and really earn respect and credibility? Now I want to talk about taking some time for self-reflection. It is really important as you go through your career to be willing to be vulnerable. Another TED Talk we could perhaps post here, if you still have that up, is I talked about a few weeks ago, Brené Brown, who wrote the book Dare to Lead, fantastic book if you haven't read it, talks about making yourself vulnerable and the importance of that. And she has a fantastic TED Talk on that. It's like 10 minutes long, but incredibly powerful. One of the things she talks about is this willingness to self-reflect and really be vulnerable and be willing to admit where you didn't succeed. And we tend to hire, we're a company that tends to hire some really top talent. And this is an area that I've seen a lot of new hires struggle with, because many who join the workforce have been straight A students, perhaps top athletes, top in their drama department or drama clubs, top musicians, and may not have really had a lot of experience in their life where they learned how to fail, and learned how to fail with grace and dignity, and most importantly, how to learn lessons from those failures and do better next time. And for that reason, I really like to take a minute in a talk like this and focus on just how important that really is, because when you've grown up that way, and that's sort of been your experiences, and it's not all of our experiences, but it does tend to be experience for a lot of individuals who do well through strong technical programs and have really good grades in school. It's sometimes really hard when that first failure comes in the workplace. And it can be really hard to accept that with grace and dignity and do the right things and learn from it. And what I will tell you is, regardless of the employer that you ultimately join in your future, most organizations are learning organizations, and they expect that you're not going to do everything with perfection. You're going to have some failures, or you're going to have some I could have, should have, would have, might have moments. Those are normal, and if you're not having those, you're probably not stretching yourself enough. You're probably not going out of your comfort zone enough. So what I really want to focus on here is, where are some of those points in your career where you really ought to naturally, before you even join the workforce, start to think about moments of self-reflection, and where should I take a step back and really think about, how did I do there? And so you'll see in the blue, I was going to say boxes, they're not boxes, blue hexagons, some moments in your career where I would encourage you to do that. And so one such example might be, you're getting ready to go to a performance evaluation with your supervisor. It's a really good idea to do some reflection and be pretty open and honest with yourself about where you think you could have done better, where you think you could have done more, where you think you could have improved, because it's a whole lot easier if you've rationalized that and come to terms with it yourself than to hear it from somebody else. It also helps you to be more prepared if your supervisor gives you feedback that you weren't even remotely ready for and didn't see. It gives you time to be thoughtful about reflecting on what you had already observed and recognize that you could do differently. At the conclusion of a project, many of you will go into roles where you're an engineer or you're a scientist, and you're a very project-based role, as opposed to having more functional responsibilities. Any project is an opportunity for learning, and many projects have longer runways. They may be a 12 to 18-month project, and as you complete those and come out of those, really great opportunity to take a step back and think about what could have done differently there as you go into a new job. And oftentimes that's within the same organization where your roles and responsibilities expand. Sometimes it's a different organization, sometimes it's a different function or group within the same company. But it's a really good time to step back and think about how you've done. When you get any feedback or advice, before you respond to it, taking a moment to breathe and do some self-reflection, even if that means you have to say, thank you for your input. I appreciate you taking the time to give that to me. Not really something I'd thought about before with that particular feedback, but I appreciate it, and let me take some time to reflect, and would you mind if I come back to you later? When you've been in a conflict or disagreement, and we talked about this a lot a few weeks ago, and really taking that time to step back and think about your role in that before you move forward. Or if you experienced a situation where it just didn't feel right, where you felt like the team dynamic was off, a relationship was off, somebody who's always really positive and happy with you is all of a sudden quite short and curt, that might be a good time to take a step back and just ask yourself if there's something that you're doing that's causing that. And so I won't go through all of the questions that you see on both sides of these, but I'm sharing with you just a few examples of the types of things that you might want to ask yourself. If you are really good at building relationships and you have a good inner circle, you can also ask, and I call it an accountability partner, right? Who are those people that you really trust, that you know have your career and your vested interest in mind, that you could also ask some of these same questions, and because they may give you a different answer than you gave yourself, and that's cause for more respection, right? More opportunity to take a step back and ask yourself whether or not they might be right. So just a few questions, was I successful? Did I accomplish my desired goals? If I didn't, why? What got in the way? Could I have done anything about that? At some point along the way during that project, could I have handled something differently to help us to meet our goals? If I was in their shoes, what would I have done? How can I grow from this? How can I learn from this? What behaviors did I demonstrate that maybe didn't help us to meet our overall goals? Or what did I do that really did help the team, and how can I learn from that and make it a habit and do it more often? Because habits really are what it takes to build excellence, right? And so the final question I will focus a bit on is just, am I being honest and transparent with myself? The times that it's really good to take a step back and ask yourself that question as you go through your career is when you feel like you should be developing and advancing and you're feeling stuck. That's a really good time to take a step back and honestly ask yourself, why might I not be moving forward? And frankly, the answer could be any number of things. Perhaps it's just there's not a job open or not an opportunity, or it could go back to any of these pages of advice that we've just gone through and that you may be missing on one of those areas. And there's a few ways to find out, right? And one of the most important ways is being really honest with yourself and really understanding what are the expectations of the job and doing some reflection, and then most importantly, growing from it. So before I go on to the next slide, does anyone else have any other questions that you tend to ask yourself when you're trying to assess your own performance? And this can be in athletics, it can be in music. A lot of the questions will be the same. Okay. No? But thank you. E shared the Brené Brown talk on vulnerability, so highly recommend watching that one if you have a few minutes. Okay. So this slide, and I don't have many more slides after this. This is really the heart of the conversation, and I'd like to get in some dialogue. What I tried to capture here is just what I think are some of the most important pieces of overall career advice that I would give to each of you. And I think that if you can even do, 75% of these well, you're going to have a very, very good start to your career and to building relationships. And so one of the things that I always tell myself, this is sort of my rule number one, is never be the smartest person in the room. And I say that a little bit with jest, but what I really mean is when you reach a point where you feel like you're not surrounding yourself with people who will make you better than you are, stronger than you are, advance you in some way, then maybe you have become the most experienced and maybe it's time to shift a role or get with a different project team or get stretched by going to a different assignment and learning something new. It's really important to surround yourself with people who are going to make you stronger. And there's lots of ways you can do that. It might be a coach, it might be a mentor. We talked about that a lot last week. So that's kind of what I mean by the never be the smartest person in the room. Always know that you can learn more and surround yourself with people that will help you to do that and really get that growth mindset. If you enter the workforce with that spirit of, I can learn more. I have a lot to learn. I can be stronger. And you take that with you throughout your career. Even when you get to 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, if you are a spirited learner who wants to constantly grow and get better, you'll have a really successful career. Another piece, and this one came from one of the strongest engineering leaders I've had the fortune to work with, and the way he talks about it is that, think about it as a team sport. What we do is really no different than trying to win the Super Bowl or trying to win the World Series. We're a team, and we're all in this together, and everyone that's part of our company is all here for the same mission. We all care about the company, we care about our customers, we care about each other, and we all have common goals. It's really important when you join an organization to remember that. Yes, it's about you. It's about bringing home a paycheck, and that's fundamentally one of the primary reasons we're all here. Perhaps if it wasn't necessary for a paycheck, we might all be on the beach or, I don't know, doing something else, right? So, of course, it's about pay. But if work is only about pay, it's not very stimulating and exciting. Work should really be about being challenging and interesting and fun, and ego can get in the way of that. So it's really important to remember that while you have personal goals and interests and desires, it's really important to be able to tie that to the organization's goals and needs and desires if you want to work for a company as opposed to working independently. You have to be honest and you have to have integrity, and once you lose that, it is really, really hard to gain that back. I think for the most part, most people assume you have those things until you violate their trust. E shared the link on Speed of Trust. By the way, that is an entire TED Talk that hits on this one bullet point. It's really hard to regain lost trust. So don't take credit for others' work. Don't change data to have it reflect your interests or your desires or to meet a personal goal or agenda. The more upfront, transparent, and honest you are, the more effective you'll find you are through your career. Get out of your comfort zone. If you find, we've talked about this a couple times, but I can't tell you how important it is. If you find that you're so comfortable that you're not feeling challenged anymore, it's time to start having career conversations with your leadership team. Keeping a good circle of trust, that's what I call it. It's a strong professional network, but it's a circle of trust. It's the people who are your champions. As you get in your career, this is a question I'd like you all to write down and remember, and hopefully call me in 20 years and say, thank you for giving me this one, Stacie. At any point in time, if I were to contact any one of you in the next 20 years of your career and say, who is your champion? Know the answer to that question. Know who the senior leaders are in an organization that see what you're doing, that know what you deliver, that see your impact, that see your capability, and that will be your voice at the table. Because if you don't know who those people are, you may not have them, and that's a challenge that you need to address. At the same time, know who the people are who aren't in your corner, because they may be there. And it may be one person, but that can be really distracting for your goal and mission. So it's really important to understand that. And how would I do that? Again, it goes back to asking questions, right? It's asking of your supervisor, how am I viewed? Who is my champion? Who are my leaders in the organization? There's lots of ways you can find that out, but asking questions is a good way to start. Learn how to be concise. The more concise you can be at getting your message across, the better, and really know what is expected of you. And take the time to tell people thank you. It doesn't have to be about monetary recognition. In fact, that's just one small piece of it. People in general have a desire to be appreciated and to feel that the work that they do adds value. And that can't come just from the senior leaders of the organization. Feeling appreciation has to come from all levels. Humans have a need to feel like what they do is adding value. So when you appreciate the work of coworkers, tell them that. And this, to me, is really the money slide in everything we're talking about, because I think if you do even half, but ideally 75% of these well, you are going to be well on your way to a good career journey. And there are tons of TED Talks on all of these topics. And I did just a quick cross-check, you are getting a pretty deep module on almost every one of these boxes during these few weeks. So kudos to you for taking the time to do this, because I think you're really going to set your career up successfully by just getting a fundamental understanding of what organizations expect. Any other career advice that anyone on this food? Oh, I see we've got. Try to gauge attitude. And when's the next time I'll be in a similar situation? So great. I'm gonna pause for a minute because it took me a minute to go back to. I think those were from our previous slide, and I think they're both fantastic points. So I'm going to pause for a minute. So in the chat, one of your colleagues just suggested when you do that self-reflection, check your attitude, and that is a fantastic point and a very good add to this presentation. Really good opportunity when you're doing self-reflection to take a step back and just even ask yourself the question, what was my attitude for this? Did I throw all my energy, passion, and enthusiasm into this project, or was I not determined to do it from the beginning? Did I have problems or concerns from the beginning that I didn't fully vet through? So thank you, Claire. That's a fantastic point. Absolutely checking your attitude. And then the other one around when's the next time I'll be in a similar situation is also a very good reflection point. It's one thing to reflect, but if you don't take that knowledge and get to apply it quickly, you may lose sight of some of your learning. So I would say not only asking yourself the question, when's the next time I'll be in the situation, but putting yourself in that situation pretty purposefully in the next few weeks or months so that you can try to do better. It takes practice to build a habit, and that self-reflection process to really build it into a habit that works for you through your career takes a lot of practice. And so another great question is, when am I going to need to do this again? Perfect, great, thank you, good insight. Okay. So this is a slide that one of my, another engineering leader that I work very, very closely with, had a long-term, very successful career as an engineering leader, talks about career growth this way, and I think it's such a simple and fantastic approach to think about your career. So the first thing he says is that if you want to be successful, you have to apply your strengths. And so that means really thinking about what your strengths are and having good self-awareness and knowing where your skills are and knowing where you can best contribute and add value to an organization. And then the next thing he'll ask you to think about is, what are your interests? Where's your passion? When you go about your day at work or at home, or where do you get your energy? Where do you get your enthusiasm? What do you really get excited and purpose and passion for? And then explore your knowledge gaps. And the way you would do that is think about, what are the jobs that I want and what are the competencies needed for that job, and then do a little self-assessment. How do I do? And I would encourage you to take it a step further and not just do self-assessment, but also talk to leaders and coaches and that inner circle of trust we talked about in your organization to help you with knowledge gaps. And then use those things to help you to build new skills. And he really talks about this as a process to get to what are the new skills that I need to build. But I think it's also important when you're thinking about your career and earning credibility, because if you really want to earn credibility, where you're going to earn it is when you're in jobs doing projects and assignments that allow you to leverage your strengths for the organization to deliver impact, but are also things that you're passionate about and excited about. And that doesn't always mean that it's going to be the perfect fit role. Sometimes you have to look at the role and ask yourself, this is the job I'm being paid to do right now. Where can I find my passion, energy, enthusiasm here? How can I make this role my own and really apply my strengths to bring my passion to this role? And so I think these are 4 boxes that are really important to think about as you start your career, and just making sure that any time in any role, you can answer these questions. What skills am I here to build? What am I trying to learn from this role? So I think this is fantastic advice and just a model I would recommend that you take forward in your career. Great. So So here's some additional career advice to add to that slide. Read often. Absolutely. I've been told many times in my career that ideally one of the first things you would do is come in every day and read something to advance yourself. I will tell you, practically speaking through my career, I found that doesn't work when I'm at the office. But one of the first things I do when I get out of bed in the morning is make my coffee and sit down and read, whether it's the Wall Street Journal or Forbes or whatever it is that I'm trying to. Sometimes I'm very purposeful about what I'm reading because it's a skill I'm trying to develop, but I do try to read often. And I've found as I grow through my career, I used to love reading. I was passionate about reading. Time doesn't exist as much anymore. There are fantastic TED Talks. I know you've heard me say it 4 times now today, but I watch a lot of TED Talks to grow. And the other thing I would add to this comment, Claire, because I think it's a fantastic add here, is not just reading or watching TED Talks or listening. Make it a habit whenever you do something like that. If you're going to read an article, you're going to read a blog, you're going to watch a TED Talk, you're going to read a book, to, at the end of that, capture what was my key learning? What is the number one thing that I learned from reading that? And then second, what am I going to do about it? What specific behavior or action am I going to start putting in place today in order to apply that learning in my own life? Because one of the things that I've seen happen a lot to be a potential, we talked about the upside of career advice, but there's also some flaws we could talk about. And one of the flaws that can happen is that you do a lot of reading, you attend a lot of classes, you sit in on podcasts, but you don't think about the applied part. Learning is only as good as how you apply it. And so I would encourage you to, yes, absolutely, great advice. Then think about how do you bring it to life by applying it in your organization, and have role models. Fantastic advice. One of the things that I always talk about with role models is look for what you admire in people's styles, and look for what you don't admire in people's styles, and then think about how that applies to your own natural demeanor, charisma, behaviors, mannerisms, because you're not necessarily, as you go through your career, going to try to emulate other people. I think your best life and best foot forward for an organization is to be you, but a constantly learning, growing, and evolving you, and to really think about the behaviors that you see in others and how much you could apply those to your style and how that would benefit you and the organization. So fantastic advice. Good. Thank you for sharing. So the next comment is, recently I was asked how important is it to me that a project I'm going to work with fits my interest compared to other aspects. Is it a negative to a company if someone says they don't place a high priority on working on something that interests them? So I'm going to answer that question the way I think you intend it, and then feel free to ask me for more clarification if I'm not hitting the point of your question. An organization is fundamentally paying your salary, right? And so to me, it's a blend, right? You have to work on the things that the company is paying you to do, but you also get a voice in that. And so the way I think that you can counter and challenge some of that is having good ongoing dialogue and career conversations with your leadership about what you view as your strengths. At Corning, we have a fantastic tool that allows people to capture this right in a system that's visible all the time. It's being purposeful about making sure that people know what you view your strengths are, what you view your interest and your passion. But that's not the same as saying that at some point in your career you're not going to be asked to work on things that aren't that. So I think your question might be, is it a negative to at that point say that's not really in line with what I'd like to work on? I think it's how you say it, and that would be the best advice I would give you for anything. There's a whole lot people can say if they say it with respect, with dignity, with constructive approach, and with a win-win goal in mind, right? So there's a big difference between me saying I won't work on that, or I'm not really interested in that, or that's not really my thing. I would never recommend that you use any of those. But I might say, I'm a little concerned. I think that's an interesting project. Interesting is a great word. You can use that in a lot of different places. It's interesting. It sounds like a challenge, but I am a little hesitant because I'm not sure how I would apply or leverage my strengths to that role. And what that leads to is a constructive conversation. And at the end of the day, you may still be asked to do things that you're not interested in, but I think it's how you have that dialogue and approach. And also remember the other advice, right, so step out of your comfort zone and step out of that uncertainty. Be willing to take on some roles that might be a challenge, but the dialogue to really determine whether or not you can be successful in that is important. So hopefully that answers the question that you were getting to there. I can't tell your full name, whoever asked that question. So if I didn't give you full clarity there, please, by all means, feel free to comment in the chat, and I will go back and more specifically answer what you were trying to get to. So because I know many of you are engineering, I'm going to go very briefly through this slide, but I thought it might be helpful just to capture some of the more specific to a manufacturing and engineering environment advice that I got when I was talking to some of our engineering leaders about this presentation. The first thing is if you are going to be an engineer in a manufacturing company, get away from your desk and get out on the production floor. Get to know operators, get to know the people that run the equipment, get to know the people that run the process, and be likable and approachable with them. That will become invaluable career advice for you. If you aren't the process owner of an area in manufacturing, respect that. And before you go out on the floor and start poking around or touching processes or touching equipment, make sure that you make friends with that process owner and that you're partnering with them on that. And always ensure that if you're on somebody else's process or somebody else's equipment, that you're being helpful and not there as a hindrance. Know your process. And the biggest piece of advice that I would give you here, and if any of you want a career in engineering, please tuck this one away because it will be invaluable for you to understand this early in your career. Knowing your process means that you will probably become a deeper technical expert in your current area of expertise. So, if we're making pencils, your area of expertise may be how you put the yellow paint on the outside of the number 2 pencil. But you have to understand the broader process. You have to know the job, the roles, the responsibilities of the person who puts the eraser in. The person who puts the little green cap on the end, you have to know how that all comes together. And you don't have to be the deep technical expert in that, but you have to respect it. And you have to understand enough of the process to not silo yourself into thinking about your own process or system. And for those of you on the line who are not in engineering, this applies in science, it applies in HR, right? You have to be able to appreciate and respect the roles of others and understand systemic thinking, right? Everybody that plays a part of a process or a system or an organization has a role to do. Understand that yours is not the only one and that yours is not the only goal that matters. The more that you can be seen as somebody who cares about the goals, the objectives of other functions, of other organizations, or other process departments, and thinks bigger picture, the more successful you're going to be. Documentation is critical in manufacturing. Many new engineers come into the workforce not understanding that, and they think that they're going to be always touching gadgets or working on the newest equipment or the newest process. It's only as good as how well you document it. And so documentation and computer work is a pretty significant part of engineering roles. Dig deep. What do I mean by that? The people in technical organizations who are respected for their technical competency tend to have the highest level of credibility. And so you're not going to be a deep technical expert in everything, but be known as a deep technical expert in something. The other thing that I heard from every engineer, which I found kind of interesting, and I've worked with engineers for a long time, was absolutely positively get some coursework and some experience in statistics. You are going to need it, and it's going to be a really critical skill. And then volunteer for that shift work, volunteer for weekend coverage, volunteer to come in and run an experiment on a line at night. You will learn a lot about how a plant in production runs when you're there on the off hours without all the other engineering support. So just a couple quick tips there. Are there any other questions while we're on this page? Oh, sorry, I'm going to go back to the chat. Are there any other questions before I go past this page on specifics to keep in mind in a manufacturing and engineering environment?
The ones that I'm seeing could probably go towards the end, so if you wanted to wait.
Okay. Okay. All right. Yeah, and I do see a question that just came through to me, so I will answer that one in just a minute. But for a minute, I'm just going to finish these slides, and then I will answer some questions. Not going to cover this slide in detail. You can read it. But this is some really good advice that I received from engineers on how to document your work. And really, the key point here is to make sure that when you're reporting results, you keep in mind that an engineer is about solving problems and providing solutions. And so this was, I thought, a really good step-by-step approach to ensuring that when you document, it doesn't mean just the solution. It means documenting the results of the experiments, the conclusions, the recommendations that you're making, and then providing the detailed analysis in the end. All right, so that was the slides. I'm going to go back to a couple questions. So this question is, what advice would you have for a senior engineer who's supposed to hand over a project to you, the new hire, but they're kind of being a helicopter colleague? And how do we own the project that we feel still belongs to someone else? So that is a fantastic question, and I could probably talk for a very long time about that. So I'm going to try to give just a couple simple pieces of advice. Engineering organizations are often by nature matrixed organizations, meaning a lot of engineers are typically assigned to project type work, and that means that they may have a project leader who's another engineer or project manager, and then have a boss. That is more common than not in engineering, and that will, those matrix environments shift and evolve as your projects change. And so one advice I might give is to try to talk it over with that engineer first and just explain, I'm really trying to learn here. I really want to have ownership and accountability, and I want to be able to take some of this work from your plate so that you can focus on other things. Can we just sit down and have a role clarity conversation so that I can understand fully what your expectations are of me? And then my ask of you in return is then let me go run with it. And if I'm not delivering, you can tell me, but I really want to take ownership over that work stream. Having the one-on-one conversation is always the best place to start where you see any potential conflict. And if that doesn't solve it, then you might want to try to talk to your direct supervisor for additional advice and or get a mentor or coach in that area. But that's a pretty common problem, by the way, not because people want to be a challenge, but because as the overall project manager, they feel the ownership and accountability and, frankly, the responsibility to ensure closure. And sometimes it's very hard as an experienced engineer to give up that to enable others to take that responsibility, and when at the end of the day, you're really the person that people are looking to ensure it's done. So I think it's everything we've talked about this. The more trust, respect, and credibility you build, the more likely they're going to be to give that to you. So I think everything we've talked about today helps lead up to this very question you're asking. But if those things aren't working, have the direct conversation and ask them. And if it still doesn't get better, leverage your supervisor, because chances are good the person you're having that challenge with is probably not also your supervisor. Okay, other questions? Can you explain further why statistics is important? Yeah, so you do a lot of data analysis within engineering, and sometimes the underlying physics can really be variable, and there's going to be a lot of different solutions. And statistics can really help you to determine what's going to be the best approach. And there are a ton of podcasts and classes available on statistics. For most roles in engineering, you don't need to be a deep statistical expert. Although I can tell you that if that's your passion area, Corning absolutely has careers where you can be the deep statistical expert. But the challenge is that those people are pretty few and far between. And you might find you need statistical support on a lot of projects, and you don't necessarily want to have to wait for the expert to become available if it's really only a basic skill you need. If you're able to do a lot of that work yourself, it can help you to be more effective and efficient in your project and move things along faster without having to wait for additional support. Okay, great question. So somebody just asked, when you said volunteer for off-shift work, doesn't this come to a disadvantage for people with other personal responsibilities, such as children or, I think that's a great question. And it's not an easy answer. At the end of the day, when you work in a manufacturing environment or an engineering environment, even if you're working in engineering for a corporate role or a division role, you generally are supporting some form of manufacturing. And often manufacturing is 24/7 environments. But I would tell you that in no way stops people from having outside of life conflicts. We all have them. Everybody has them. When I say volunteer, it doesn't mean do it 24/7 or all the time or take a role that's off shift. But it does mean every once in a while, if you can fit it into your schedule and you can help cover those things, it can be a really value added and beneficial experience. So I don't think it holds people back who don't do that. I think people who can't do that have to find another way to get the same knowledge, skills, and experience. There's lots of ways to we talked about it being a journey, and so actually as we wrap up, I think this is a good way to go back to the first slide. Your career is a journey, and there is lots of different ways and paths and maps to get to your destination. And so what I would say very specifically to that question is find another way. We work through it, get coaches, have them offer suggestions. But usually I think probably most people can find a way at some point to work their schedules to be able to do those sorts of things, to see experiments offline, to help with some of that offline coverage. It can be really helpful. I'm going to try to hit a couple of these questions. So someone asked, can you clarify what it means to be a champion? Well, think about it this simply. We have a lot of talent discussions in an organization, as does any organization, and your champion is the person who really believes in you and supports you and is your advocate and can speak up on your behalf when you're in talent meetings, talent discussions, when project opportunities are coming along. They believe in you and they trust you and they respect you and they will help be your voice. So that's really what we mean by champion. Maybe a boss, it may be your direct supervisor, it may not, it could be their boss or their boss's boss, or it could be HR, but really knowing that somebody really knows you, really understands you, and really respects you and will be your voice. This is a pretty detailed question, but I'm going to kind of high level hit it. Have you ever in your career realized that your initial passion wasn't really your life's passion, and how did you pivot to focus on it? Yeah, I mean, so personally, I can tell you my first degree was to go be a paralegal. I thought that's what I wanted to do. I got almost to the end of the degree and realized there was no way that's what I wanted to do every day of my life. So what I did was really think about where are the other types of jobs that those skills can be applicable. And I ended up realizing how much of a legal context there is to the HR function. And I actually ended up going back to get my HR degree heavily because it was an easy, I could transfer that paralegal degree, get a lot of the same credit for same courses, and end up applying the HR degree in the organization, and what I realized is that HR is truly my passion. And so I think it's really about taking a step back and thinking about how can I apply what I already know. I have a lot invested in my education, I have a lot invested in my experiences, and how can I take that and go apply it somewhere else where I might be more passionate. Sometimes I would also add, though, it's probably just a matter of trying a different assignment. Sometimes you just get stale. It's not that your current work or function or focus is not your passion area. You just get stale and want to do something different. So before you make major life-changing, career-altering decisions, I do recommend just trying a different assignment and trying to get a spark back. If you can't after a new assignment, that's the point where you start having some career conversations with an HR manager, with an outside career consultant, a life coach. Lots of those individuals can be helpful, but sometimes it's just a spark. So be cautious of making major pivots without really vetting out, is that what it is, or did you just get stale for a bit? Okay, great questions and great engagement. So thank you all so much for your ideas and your additional questions and thoughts and comments. So just in conclusion, I definitely recommend that you focus very much on that first slide. You're about to embark on a really exciting journey. Make it fun, make it a journey, have a destination in mind, but be really open to other things, because I think that's how you'll get the most fruitful career. And then second, go ahead and look at those 2 TED Talks that we shared. I think they both will help reinforce a lot of the messages that we talked through today. So we're at noon with that, so thank you all for your time. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you so much, Stacie. Another great presentation as always. And thank you everybody for attending and the great questions. I hope everybody has a great rest of the day.
Thank
Bye.
you.